Question 1. Examination of the data shows that a Georgia weapons carry license holder is seeking to understand the legality of carrying a handgun while attending a community event held at a public elementary school's gymnasium on a Saturday. What is the most appropriate course of action to ensure compliance with Georgia law? Option A. Ask other attendees at the event if they are carrying firearms and proceed based on their actions. Option B. Consult the current Georgia Official Code annotated O.CGA. Section 16-11-127, 1 to determine if a public elementary school gymnasium, even when used for a community event on a weekend, is a prohibited location for carrying a firearm by a license holder. Option C. Assume that since the event is on a Saturday and not during regular school hours, the prohibition on carrying firearms in schools does not apply. Option D. Rely on the understanding that a weapons carry license generally permits carrying in public places, and a gymnasium is a public space. The correct answer is B. Consult the current Georgia Official Code annotated O.CGA. Section 16-11-127, 1 to determine if a public elementary school gymnasium, even when used for a community event on a weekend, is a prohibited location for carrying a firearm by a license holder. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to navigate the nuances of Georgia's weapons carry license, WCL, regulations concerning the possession of firearms in specific locations, particularly those frequented by the public and potentially housing sensitive activities. The challenge lies in accurately interpreting the scope of prohibited areas and understanding the exception, ensuring compliance to avoid legal repercussions and maintain public safety. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between permissible and impermissible firearm carry locations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding of Georgia Code O.CGA Section 16-11-127, 1, which outlines prohibited places for carrying firearms by license holders. This approach necessitates consulting the most current version of the Georgia Official Code annotated to confirm the specific definitions and exclusions related to government buildings, courthouses, polling places, schools, and places of worship. It requires recognizing that, while a WCL permits carrying in many public places, specific statutory prohibitions override this general permission in designated locations. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to the explicit legal framework established by Georgia law for WCL holders, prioritizing statutory compliance and public safety. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that a WCL grants unrestricted carry rights in all public spaces, disregarding the explicit prohibitions outlined in O.CGA Section 16-11-127. 1. This failure to consult and understand the specific statutory limitations is a direct violation of the law and demonstrates a lack of due diligence. Another incorrect approach is to rely on anecdotal information or outdated interpretations of the law regarding prohibited locations. Laws can change, and relying on informal advice rather than the official code can lead to serious legal consequences. This approach lacks the rigor required for regulatory compliance. A further incorrect approach is to interpret the exceptions to the prohibited locations too broadly, assuming personal discretion in situations where the law is clear. For instance, assuming a place of worship is permissible to carry in without confirming its specific status under Georgia law, especially if it also functions as a school or community center with specific restrictions, is a misinterpretation of the statute. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a proactive and diligent approach to understanding their legal obligations. This involves regularly reviewing relevant statutes and official guidance, seeking clarification from legal counsel or relevant authorities when in doubt, and prioritizing strict adherence to the letter of the law. A decision-making framework should involve 1. Identifying the relevant jurisdiction and governing statutes, Georgia Code O.CGA Section 16-11-127, 1. 2. Consulting the most current and official version of these statutes. 3. Analyzing the specific location in question against the statutory definitions of prohibited places. 4. Considering any applicable exceptions or clarifications provided by law. 5. Making a decision based on strict legal compliance, erring on the side of caution if ambiguity exists. Question 2. Upon reviewing Georgia's weapons carry license, WCL regulations, a licensed individual is considering attending a public hearing at their county courthouse. They possess a valid WCL and are aware that Georgia law generally permits WCL holders to carry handguns in many public places. However, they are unsure if the courthouse itself is a permissible location. Which of the following actions best reflects a compliant and responsible approach to the situation under Georgia law? Option A. Refrain from carrying a handgun into the county courthouse, recognizing that courthouses are specifically listed as prohibited locations under Georgia law. Option B. Carry a handgun into the county courthouse, believing that their WCL supersedes any specific location restrictions for public buildings. Option C. Carry a handgun into the county courthouse, having heard from a friend that it is generally acceptable to carry in government buildings. Option D. Carry a handgun into the county courthouse, assuming that, as a WCL holder, they have the right to carry in any public building. The correct answer is A. Refrain from carrying a handgun into the county courthouse, recognizing that courthouses are specifically listed as prohibited locations under Georgia law. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to navigate the nuances of Georgia's weapons carry license, WCL laws, specifically concerning the permissible locations for carrying a handgun. Misinterpreting these regulations can lead to serious legal consequences, including criminal charges and the revocation of a WCL. The challenge lies in applying the general principles of Georgia law to a specific, potentially ambiguous situation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding and strict adherence to Georgia's official code of annotated OCG. Section 16-11-127, 1, which outlines prohibited places for carrying firearms. This statute clearly lists locations such as courthouses, correctional facilities, and polling places on election days. Therefore, recognizing that a county courthouse is explicitly listed as a prohibited location, and choosing not to carry a handgun, there is the correct and legally compliant approach. This demonstrates a commitment to upholding the law and maintaining responsible firearm ownership. Incorrect approach is analysis. Carrying a handgun into a county courthouse because one believes their WCL grants them broad rights, without considering specific statutory prohibitions, is a direct violation of OCG. Section 16-11-127. 1. This approach disregards the explicit limitations placed on WCL holders and demonstrates a lack of due diligence in understanding the law. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that because the courthouse is a public building, it is permissible to carry a firearm, ignoring the specific legal designations of prohibited places. This demonstrates a failure to differentiate between general public access and specific legal restrictions. Finally, relying on personal interpretation or anecdotal advice from others about where firearms are permitted, rather than consulting the official Georgia statutes, is a dangerous and legally unsound practice that can lead to unintentional violations. Professional reasoning. Professionals seeking to carry a firearm legally in Georgia must adopt a proactive and diligent approach to understanding the law. This involves consulting the most current version of the OCG, particularly Title 16, Chapter 11, concerning weapons and offensive conduct. When faced with uncertainty about a specific location, the professional decision-making process should involve cross-referencing the location against the statutory list of prohibited places. If ambiguity persists, seeking clarification from official sources, such as the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, GBI, or legal counsel specializing in firearm law, is the most responsible course of action. Prioritizing legal compliance over personal convenience or assumption is paramount. Question 3. When evaluating the permissible locations for carrying a handgun under a Georgia weapons carry license, WCL, what is the correct understanding of carrying a firearm within a courthouse building? Option A. Carrying a handgun within a courthouse building is prohibited unless the individual is a law enforcement officer or a judge, or meets other specific statutory exceptions. Option B. Carrying a handgun within a courthouse building is permissible for any WCL holder as long as they are not actively engaged in any disruptive behavior. Option C. Carrying a handgun within a courthouse building is permissible for any WCL holder who believes they need to carry for personal protection. Option D. Carrying a handgun within a courthouse building is permissible if there is no explicit signage prohibiting firearms. The correct answer is A. Carrying a handgun within a courthouse building is prohibited unless the individual is a law enforcement officer or a judge, or meets other specific statutory exceptions. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to navigate the nuances of Georgia's weapons carry license, WCL laws, specifically concerning the permissible locations for carrying a firearm. The challenge lies in understanding the exceptions and prohibitions outlined in the Georgia Code, which can be complex and require careful interpretation to avoid legal violations. Misinterpreting these laws can lead to serious consequences, including criminal charges and the revocation of a WCL. The best professional approach involves a thorough understanding of Georgia's specific statutes regarding weapons carry, particularly WCL. Section 16-11-127, 1, which lists prohibited places. This approach prioritizes adherence to the letter of the law by recognizing that carrying a firearm in a courthouse is explicitly prohibited unless specific exceptions apply, such as being a law enforcement officer or a judge. Without such an exception, the default is prohibition. This aligns with the ethical obligation of a WCL holder to act responsibly and within legal boundaries, ensuring public safety and maintaining the integrity of the legal system. An incorrect approach would be to assume that carrying a firearm in a courthouse is permissible simply because one possesses a valid WCL. The WCL grants the privilege to carry in many locations, but it does not override specific statutory prohibitions. Relying on a general understanding of WCL privileges without consulting the detailed list of prohibited locations in WCL. Section 16-11-127, 1 is a significant legal and ethical failure. Another incorrect approach would be to believe that personal discretion or a perceived need for self-defense justifies carrying a weapon in a prohibited area like a courthouse. Georgia law is clear on these prohibitions, and personal judgment does not supersede statutory law. Finally, assuming that signage alone dictates permissibility without understanding the underlying statutory prohibitions is also a failure. While signage often reflects statutory restrictions, the law itself is the ultimate authority. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that begins with a comprehensive review of the Georgia weapons carry license statutes, focusing on both the rights granted and the prohibitions imposed. When in doubt about a specific location, the professional should err on the side of caution and seek clarification from official sources or legal counsel rather than making assumptions. This proactive approach ensures compliance and upholds the responsibilities associated with carrying a firearm. Question 4. The analysis reveals that a Georgia weapons carry license, WCL, holder is attending a community event held at a public park. This park is adjacent to a courthouse building. Considering Georgia law, what is the most prudent course of action for the WCL holder regarding carrying their handgun? Option A. Carry the handgun openly, as open carry is permitted under Georgia law for WCL holders, and the location is a public park. Option B. Carry the handgun openly or concealed, as a public park is generally considered a permissible location for WCL holders, and the proximity to the courthouse does not alter this status unless the event is specifically within the courthouse grounds. Option C. Assume that the proximity to the courthouse makes the entire area a prohibited zone and therefore refrain from carrying the handgun. Option D. Carry the handgun concealed, as this is a less conspicuous method and therefore less likely to cause concern or violate any implied restrictions. Correct answer is B. Carry the handgun openly or concealed, as a public park is generally considered a permissible location for WCL holders, and the proximity to the courthouse does not alter this status unless the event is specifically within the courthouse grounds. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to navigate the nuances of Georgia's weapons carry license, WCL laws, specifically concerning the permissible locations for carrying a handgun. Misinterpreting these regulations can lead to serious legal consequences, including criminal charges and the revocation of a WCL. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between legally permissible and prohibited locations, especially in areas that might seem ambiguous. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough understanding and strict adherence to Georgia's official code of annotated WCL. Section 16-11-127, 1, which outlines prohibited places for carrying firearms. This approach prioritizes consulting the most current and authoritative legal sources to confirm the legality of carrying a handgun in a specific location. For instance, understanding that while a WCL generally permits carrying in most public places, specific prohibitions exist for locations like courthouses, polling places on election days, correctional facilities, and within 150 feet of a polling place during a primary or election. It also involves recognizing that private property owners can post signs prohibiting firearms, and a licensee must respect these restrictions. This approach ensures compliance with the letter and spirit of Georgia law, safeguarding against legal repercussions and upholding responsible firearm ownership. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that having a valid WCL automatically grants permission to carry a handgun in all locations, including those explicitly prohibited by CCW Section 16-11-127. 1. This demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of the law's limitations and can lead to carrying a firearm in a prohibited area, resulting in criminal charges. Another incorrect approach is to rely on informal advice or personal interpretations of the law without verifying with official legal statutes. This could involve listening to hearsay or making assumptions based on past experiences that may no longer be accurate due to legislative changes. Such an approach lacks the necessary diligence and can result in unintentional violations. A third incorrect approach is to carry a handgun into a private establishment that has clearly posted signage prohibiting firearms, despite having a WCL. While CCW Section 16-11-137 allows for the carrying of firearms in certain places, it does not override the rights of private property owners to prohibit firearms on their premises, as outlined in CCW Section 16-11-127. 1(a)(10). Disregarding such signage is a violation of the law. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Georgia who are licensed to carry handguns should adopt a proactive and informed approach to legal compliance. This involves regularly reviewing CCW Section 16-11-127, 1 and related statutes, seeking clarification from legal counsel or official state resources when in doubt about specific locations, and always erring on the side of caution. A responsible licensee understands that their WCL is a privilege, not an absolute right, and carries with it the obligation to be intimately familiar with and abide by all applicable laws and restrictions. Question 5. Comparative studies suggest that understanding the nuances of weapons carry regulations is paramount for responsible firearm ownership. In Georgia, a licensed weapons carrier is entering a courthouse for a routine legal matter. While there is no explicit signage at the entrance indicating that weapons are prohibited, the carrier is aware that courthouses are statutorily designated as restricted locations for carrying firearms. Which of the following actions best demonstrates adherence to Georgia's weapons carry license requirements? Option A. Carrying the weapon into the courthouse, believing that personal discretion and the need for self-defense override statutory restrictions in such locations. Option B. Carrying the weapon into the courthouse, assuming that the lack of explicit signage implies permission. Option C. Proceeding into the courthouse without carrying a weapon, recognizing the statutory prohibition despite the absence of signage. Option D. Carrying the weapon into the courthouse, but keeping it concealed, assuming that concealment negates the prohibition. Correct answer is C. Proceeding into the courthouse without carrying a weapon, recognizing the statutory prohibition despite the absence of signage. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge involving the interpretation and application of Georgia's Weapons Carry License, WCL, laws in a dynamic public setting. The challenge lies in balancing an individual's right to carry a weapon with the legal restrictions and responsibilities associated with that right, particularly when encountering a situation that could be misconstrued or lead to unintended legal consequences. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with Georgia law and to avoid actions that could jeopardize the license holder's legal standing or public safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding of Georgia's specific prohibitions regarding carrying weapons in certain locations. This approach prioritizes adherence to the letter of the law, recognizing that ignorance or misinterpretation of these restrictions can lead to serious legal repercussions. Specifically, Georgia law under CCW A. Section 16-11-127. 1. Prohibits carrying a weapon in certain places, including any polling place during the hours an election is being held, any courthouse, or any jail. A license holder must actively know and respect these designated no-carry zones. Therefore, recognizing the courthouse as a prohibited location and choosing not to carry a weapon within its premises, even if not explicitly posted, is the legally compliant and professionally responsible action. This aligns with the principle of proactive compliance and avoiding potential violations. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that a lack of explicit signage negates a legal prohibition. Georgia law designates certain locations as prohibited for carrying weapons regardless of whether signage is present. Relying on the absence of a sign is a failure to comply with the statutory requirements and demonstrates a lack of due diligence in understanding one's legal obligations as a WCL holder. Another incorrect approach is to interpret the law based on personal opinion or perceived intent rather than the explicit statutory language. The law is clear about prohibited locations. Personal beliefs about the necessity or safety of carrying in such places do not override these legal mandates. Finally, assuming that a WCL grants unfettered carrying rights in all public spaces, except those with explicit signage, is a fundamental misunderstanding of the regulatory framework. The WCL permits carrying in many places, but it is subject to specific statutory exceptions and prohibitions. Professional reasoning. Professionals seeking or holding a Georgia WCL should adopt a decision-making process rooted in a commitment to understanding and adhering to all applicable statutes. This involves 1. Proactive education, regularly reviewing and understanding the most current Georgia laws pertaining to weapons carry, including prohibited locations and circumstances. 2. Strict adherence to statutory prohibitions, prioritizing compliance with legally defined no-carry zones, irrespective of signage. 3. Seeking clarification. If there is any ambiguity regarding a location or situation, consulting official legal resources or seeking advice from law enforcement or legal counsel. 4. Prioritizing safety and legality, making decisions that unequivocally uphold the law and ensure public safety, rather than relying on assumptions or personal interpretations. Question 6. The investigation demonstrates that an applicant for a Georgia Weapons Carry License, WCL, has a prior conviction for a misdemeanor offense that is not explicitly enumerated as a disqualifying offense under WCL, Section 16-11-129. However, the nature of the misdemeanor involves conduct that raises concerns about the applicant's potential to pose a risk to public safety. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority in this situation? Option A. Request additional information from the applicant's neighbors to gauge their perception of the applicant's character and potential for violence. Option B. Automatically deny the WCL application because any misdemeanor conviction, regardless of its nature, indicates a lack of suitability for carrying a weapon. Option C. Issue the WCL immediately, as the specific misdemeanor offense is not listed as an automatic disqualifier in WCL, Section 16-11-129. Option D. Conduct a thorough review of the applicant's entire criminal history and the specific facts surrounding the misdemeanor conviction to determine if the applicant is a suitable person to carry a weapon, exercising discretion as provided by law. Correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough review of the applicant's entire criminal history and the specific facts surrounding the misdemeanor conviction to determine if the applicant is a suitable person to carry a weapon, exercising discretion as provided by law. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a scenario where an applicant for a Georgia Weapons Carry License, WCL, has a past conviction for a misdemeanor offense that, while not explicitly listed as a disqualifier in WCL, Section 16-11-129, involves conduct that could be interpreted as a threat to public safety. This presents a professional challenge because the licensing authority must balance the applicant's right to apply with the mandate to ensure public safety and prevent the issuance of licenses to individuals who may pose a risk. The judgment required involves interpreting the spirit of the law, not just its letter, and considering the totality of circumstances. The best approach involves a thorough review of the applicant's entire criminal history and a careful assessment of the nature of the misdemeanor conviction in relation to the criteria for a WCL. This includes considering whether the conduct underlying the conviction demonstrates a propensity for violence or a disregard for the law that would make the applicant a danger to themselves or others if armed. This aligns with the overarching goal of CCWExam, Section 16-11-129, which is to ensure that only qualified individuals are granted the privilege of carrying a weapon. The licensing authority has discretion to deny a license if they have reasonable cause to believe the applicant is not a suitable person to possess a WCL, even if the specific offense isn't an automatic disqualifier. An approach that focuses solely on whether the specific misdemeanor is listed as an automatic disqualifier in CCWExam, Section 16-11-129, without further investigation into the nature of the offense and its implications for public safety, is insufficient. This fails to exercise the necessary due diligence and discretionary power granted to the licensing authority to protect the public. Another unacceptable approach would be to automatically deny the license based on the mere existence of any misdemeanor conviction, regardless of its nature or recency. This oversteps the statutory authority by imposing a stricter standard than what is legally required and fails to provide a fair assessment of the individual's current suitability. Finally, an approach that relies on anecdotal information or personal biases rather than a systematic review of the applicant's record and relevant statutes is professionally unsound and ethically compromised. Such an approach undermines the integrity of the licensing process and can lead to arbitrary decisions. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a comprehensive review of all submitted documentation, a thorough investigation of any potentially disqualifying factors, including the nature and context of past convictions, and a reasoned application of Georgia law, particularly CCWExam, Section 16-11-129, to the facts of the case. This framework emphasizes fairness, due process, and the paramount importance of public safety. Question 7. Analysis of Georgia's weapons carry license regulations. If an individual with a valid WCL is considering carrying a handgun into a restaurant that serves both food and alcoholic beverages and has an outdoor patio area, what is the most prudent course of action to ensure compliance with CCWExam, Section 16-11-127? 1. Option A. Rely on the absence of explicit "no guns allowed" signage on the main entrance, assuming that carrying a firearm is permitted in all areas of the establishment. Option B. Assume that carrying a handgun is permissible as long as the establishment serves food and has an outdoor patio, regardless of alcohol sales or posted signage. Option C. Carry the handgun discreetly inside the restaurant, as the law primarily focuses on visible displays of firearms and does not explicitly mention patios. Option D. Ascertain the establishment's primary revenue source to determine if it qualifies as a restaurant deriving at least 50% of its revenue from food sales, and check for any posted signage prohibiting firearms on the premises, including the patio. The correct answer is D. Ascertain the establishment's primary revenue source to determine if it qualifies as a restaurant deriving at least 50% of its revenue from food sales, and check for any posted signage prohibiting firearms on the premises, including the patio. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to navigate the nuances of Georgia's weapons carry license, WCL, regulations concerning the carrying of firearms in specific locations, particularly those that may be frequented by the public, but are not explicitly listed as prohibited. The individual must exercise careful judgment to avoid violating state law, while also understanding the intent behind such regulations, which often prioritize public safety and the prevention of firearm-related incidents in sensitive areas. The challenge lies in interpreting the scope of public gathering and private property in the context of a business that also serves the public. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding of Georgia's Official Code of Georgia Annotated, CCGA, Section 16-11-127, 1, which outlines prohibited places for carrying firearms. This approach requires the license holder to determine if the specific location, a restaurant with a patio, falls under any of the explicitly prohibited categories, or if it is private property where the owner has posted signage prohibiting firearms. If the restaurant is a place where alcohol is consumed, and it is not a restaurant that serves food and derives at least 50% of its revenue from food sales, it could be considered a prohibited location under OCG. A. Section 16-11-127, 1(a)(7). Furthermore, if the property owner has posted the required signage as per OCG. A. Section 16-11-127, 1b, carrying a firearm would be prohibited regardless of the establishment's primary function. The most prudent action is to verify the specific nature of the establishment and any posted signage. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that because the establishment serves food and has a patio, it is permissible to carry a firearm. This overlooks the critical detail in OCG. A. Section 16-11-127, 1(a)(7, which prohibits carrying firearms in any public gathering place that is not a restaurant deriving at least 50% of its revenue from food sales, especially if alcohol is served. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on the absence of explicit "no guns allowed" signage. While signage is a clear indicator, the law also prohibits firearms in certain types of establishments regardless of signage if they fall under the definition of prohibited places. Finally, assuming that carrying on a patio is different from carrying inside the establishment is a misinterpretation. The law generally applies to the entire premises of a prohibited location. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a proactive and informed approach to firearm carry laws. This involves 1. Familiarizing oneself with the entirety of OCG. A. Section 16-11-127. 1. Paying close attention to all prohibited locations and exceptions. 2. When in doubt about a specific location, err on the side of caution and refrain from carrying a firearm. 3. Actively look for and respect posted signage prohibiting firearms. 4. Understand that the law's intent is to enhance public safety, and compliance is paramount. 5. If necessary, seek clarification from legal counsel or the relevant law enforcement agency regarding specific interpretations of the law. Question 8. Consider a scenario where an individual, legally licensed to carry a weapon in Georgia, encounters a person aggressively shouting insults and making vague threats from a distance of approximately 50 feet across a public park. The individual feels intimidated, but is not physically threatened or in immediate danger of death or great bodily harm. Which of the following actions best reflects responsible and legally compliant behavior in this situation? Option A. Maintain a calm demeanor, avoid engaging with the individual, and if the situation escalates or the individual approaches with clear intent to cause harm, then consider defensive actions in accordance with Georgia law. Option B. Approach the individual to verbally confront them and de-escalate the situation by asserting their right to be in the park. Option C. Draw their firearm and point it at the individual to deter them from further aggression. Option D. Immediately call law enforcement and report the individual's behavior, but do not engage or display their weapon. The correct answer is A. Maintain a calm demeanor, avoid engaging with the individual, and if the situation escalates or the individual approaches with clear intent to cause harm, then consider defensive actions in accordance with Georgia law. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance their right to self-defense with the legal obligations and responsibilities associated with carrying a weapon in Georgia. The challenge lies in accurately assessing a situation to determine if the use of deadly force is legally justified, while also understanding the potential legal ramifications of misjudgment. The Georgia Weapons Carry License, WCL, exam, even if optional, emphasizes responsible firearm handling and the legal framework surrounding its use, underscoring the importance of informed decision-making in potentially volatile situations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough understanding and strict adherence to Georgia's laws regarding the use of deadly force, specifically the justification for self-defense. This means recognizing that the legal standard requires an honest and reasonable belief that deadly force is necessary to prevent death or great bodily harm to oneself or another, or to prevent the commission of a forcible felony. This approach prioritizes de-escalation and avoidance of conflict whenever safely possible, and only resorting to the use of a firearm when all other reasonable options have been exhausted and the legal threshold for self-defense has been met. This aligns with the principles of responsible gun ownership and the legal requirements for carrying a weapon in Georgia, emphasizing that the right to carry is not a license to use a weapon indiscriminately. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that the mere presence of a perceived threat, without an immediate and overt act of aggression, or a clear intent to cause death or great bodily harm, justifies the use of a firearm. This fails to meet the legal standard for self-defense in Georgia, which requires a reasonable belief of imminent danger. Another incorrect approach is to use a firearm to resist arrest or to prevent the commission of a non-forcible felony, as Georgia law specifically limits the justification for deadly force to preventing death, great bodily harm, or forcible felonies. Furthermore, an approach that involves brandishing a weapon to intimidate or threaten an individual without meeting the legal criteria for self-defense could lead to criminal charges, as it constitutes an unlawful display of a weapon. Professional reasoning. Professionals faced with such situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical responsibility. This framework includes 1. Situational assessment. Objectively evaluate the threat level, considering immediate danger, intent, and the availability of escape or de-escalation. 2. Legal knowledge application. Recall and apply Georgia's specific laws on self-defense and the use of deadly force. 3. Proportionality. Ensure that any response is proportionate to the threat faced. 4. Documentation and reporting. If force is used, meticulously document the events and report them accurately to the authorities. This systematic approach helps ensure that actions are legally defensible and ethically sound. Question 9. During the evaluation of personal safety protocols for a Georgia resident who holds a valid weapons carry license, WCL, what is the most legally sound approach to determining where they may carry a handgun? Option A. Consider only posted signage at a location. If no explicit "no firearms" sign is present, assume carrying is permitted with a WCL. Option B. Assume that a valid WCL grants the right to carry a handgun in any location within Georgia, as the license signifies a level of vetting and trust. Option C. Thoroughly review Georgia's weapons carry license statutes, specifically CCWA Section 16-11-127. 1. To identify all statutorily prohibited locations, understanding that a WCL allows carry in most other places. Option D. Rely on informal advice from friends or online forums regarding which locations are generally considered safe for carrying a handgun with a WCL. Correct answer is C. Thoroughly review Georgia's weapons carry license statutes, specifically CCWA Section 16-11-127. 1. To identify all statutorily prohibited locations, understanding that a WCL allows carry in most other places. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance their right to self-defense with the legal responsibilities and restrictions placed upon carrying a weapon in Georgia. The core of the challenge lies in accurately interpreting and applying Georgia's weapons carry license WCL laws, specifically concerning the permissible locations for carrying a handgun. Misinterpreting these laws can lead to serious legal consequences, including criminal charges, even if the individual possesses a valid WCL. Careful judgment is required to avoid inadvertently violating the law while ensuring personal safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding of Georgia's weapons carry license statutes, particularly CCWA Section 16-11-127. 1. Which outlines prohibited locations. This approach prioritizes adherence to the law by recognizing that a WCL grants the privilege to carry a handgun in many places, but not all. Specifically, it acknowledges that carrying a handgun into a polling place on Election Day or into any government building that has been designated as a secure area with security personnel and screening equipment is prohibited, regardless of WCL status. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the explicit prohibitions outlined in Georgia law, ensuring the individual remains within legal boundaries. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that a valid WCL permits carrying a handgun in all locations within Georgia. This is a fundamental misunderstanding of the law, as Georgia statutes clearly delineate specific places where carrying a handgun is prohibited, even for WCL holders. This approach fails to acknowledge the statutory limitations and could lead to an illegal act. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on personal interpretation or hearsay regarding permissible locations. Laws are precise, and relying on informal advice or assumptions rather than consulting the official statutes or seeking clarification from legal authorities is a recipe for legal trouble. This approach lacks the necessary diligence and respect for the legal framework. A further incorrect approach is to believe that the presence of a WCL automatically overrides any posted signage prohibiting firearms. While signage can be a factor, the statutory prohibitions are paramount. Even if a location is not explicitly listed in the statute, as prohibited specific signage might still be relevant in certain contexts, but the statutory prohibitions are absolute. This approach ignores the layered nature of firearm regulations and the primacy of state law. Professional reasoning. Professionals faced with this situation should adopt a proactive and informed approach. This involves 1. Consulting the official Georgia Code annotated O.CGA for the most current and accurate information regarding weapons carry laws. 2. Familiarizing themselves with O.CGA, Section 16-11-127. 1. Which details prohibited locations. 3. Understanding that a WCL is a privilege, not an absolute right to carry a firearm anywhere. 4. Seeking clarification from law enforcement or legal counsel if there is any ambiguity about a specific location's permissibility. 5. Prioritizing legal compliance over personal convenience or assumptions. Question 10. Research into the financial requirements for obtaining a weapons carry license, WCL, in Georgia indicates that an applicant must pay a non-refundable application fee, a fee for fingerprinting, and a fee for a background check. Additionally, the purchase of a firearm in Georgia is subject to state sales tax. If the WCL application fee is $75, the fingerprinting fee is $20, the background check fee is $15, and the sales tax on the firearm is 7% of its $500. Purchase price. What is the total mandatory cost directly associated with applying for and acquiring the firearm for which the WCL is sought? Option A, $75. Application fee plus $20. Fingerprinting fee plus $15. Background check fee plus $100. Optional training course plus $500. 0.0 sales tax equals $210. 00 plus $35. 00 equals $245. 00. Option B, $75. 00 application fee plus $20. 00 fingerprinting fee plus $15. 00 background check fee plus $500. 00 firearm purchase price equals $610. 00. Option C, $75. 00 application fee plus $20. 00 fingerprinting fee plus $15. 00 background check fee equals $110. 00. Option D, $75. 00 application fee plus $20. 00 fingerprinting fee plus $15. 00 background check fee plus $500. 00 asterisk 0. 07 sales tax equals $145. 00 plus $35. 00 equals $180. 00. The correct answer is D, $75. 00 application fee plus $20. 00 fingerprinting fee plus $15. 00 background check fee plus $500. 00 asterisk 0. 07 sales tax equals $145. 00 plus $35. 00 equals $180. 00. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge by requiring the applicant to accurately calculate the total cost of firearm ownership, including mandatory fees and potential taxes, within the specific regulatory framework of Georgia. Miscalculation could lead to financial hardship for the applicant or an incomplete application, necessitating reapplication and further delays. The challenge lies in meticulously applying the correct fee structure and understanding which costs are directly tied to the weapons carry license, WCL, application versus general firearm ownership expenses. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves identifying all fees directly associated with the Georgia weapons carry license application process as outlined by Georgia law, and then adding any applicable state sales tax on the firearm itself, as this is a direct cost of acquiring the item for which the license is sought. This approach is correct because it adheres strictly to the defined costs for obtaining the WCL and acknowledges the financial implications of firearm acquisition that the license facilitates. Georgia law specifies the application fee, fingerprinting fee, and any background check fees. The sales tax on the firearm is a separate but directly related cost of ownership. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to only consider the application fee and ignore other mandatory costs like fingerprinting and background checks. This fails to account for all legally mandated expenses required for the WCL, potentially underestimating the total financial commitment. Another incorrect approach is to include optional costs such as gun safes, ammunition, or training courses. While these are important for responsible firearm ownership, they are not direct requirements for obtaining the WCL itself, and therefore fall outside the scope of the license application's financial requirements. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to exclude any sales tax on the firearm, as this is a direct cost incurred at the point of purchase that is intrinsically linked to the possession of the firearm for which the WCL is being obtained. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such calculations by first consulting the official Georgia Bureau of Investigation, GBI, or the relevant county probate court website for the most current fee schedule for the weapons carry license. They should then identify each line item that is a mandatory component of the application. Next, they must determine if state sales tax applies to the firearm purchase itself, as this is a cost of acquiring the item. Any costs not explicitly mandated by the WCL application process or directly related to the acquisition of the firearm should be excluded from this specific calculation. Question 11. System analysis indicates a Georgia Weapons Carry License, WCL, holder who is also a law enforcement officer is approached by a close personal friend who is applying for their own WCL. The friend, aware of the officer's position, asks if the officer can speed things up or put in a good word to ensure their application is processed quickly and favorably, citing their long-standing friendship. Considering the Georgia statutory framework for WCL issuance, which of the following represents the most professionally responsible and legally compliant course of action for the officer? Option A. Offer to personally vouch for the friend's character and reliability to the WCL issuing authority, bypassing the standard background check procedures. Option B. Agree to informally inquire about the application's status with the issuing agency, assuring the friend that this is just a friendly check and not an attempt to influence the outcome. Option C. Politely but firmly decline the request, explaining that all WCL applications must follow the same established legal procedures and background checks, and that no exceptions can be made due to personal relationships. Option D. Advise the friend on specific aspects of the background check process that are often points of contention and suggest ways to frame their responses to mitigate potential issues. The correct answer is C. Politely but firmly decline the request, explaining that all WCL applications must follow the same established legal procedures and background checks, and that no exceptions can be made due to personal relationships. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate a situation where a personal relationship might influence the application of official duties. The core of the challenge lies in maintaining impartiality and adhering strictly to the Georgia Weapons Carry License, WCL requirements, even when faced with a request from a close acquaintance. Failure to do so could lead to legal repercussions, compromise the integrity of the WCL process, and erode public trust. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between appropriate assistance and undue influence. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a clear and documented refusal to expedite the process based on the personal relationship. This approach upholds the principle of equal treatment under the law and ensures that all WCL applications are processed according to established Georgia statutes and administrative rules. Specifically, Georgia law mandates that all applications for a WCL must undergo a thorough background check and meet all statutory eligibility criteria, regardless of the applicant's relationship to the license holder or issuing official. Expediting or bypassing these steps for a friend would violate these legal mandates and the ethical obligation to administer the law fairly and impartially. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and professional integrity. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves agreeing to put in a good word or informally inquire about the status of the friend's application without following official procedures. This is professionally unacceptable because it creates the appearance of favoritism and can lead to the perception, or reality, of preferential treatment. While not an outright violation of a specific statute, it undermines the fairness and transparency of the WCL process and could be interpreted as an attempt to circumvent established protocols, potentially leading to a WCL being issued to someone who might not otherwise qualify if the standard process were strictly followed. Another incorrect approach is to directly intervene in the background check process or attempt to bypass standard waiting periods. This is a clear violation of Georgia law governing WCL issuance. Such actions would constitute an abuse of authority and could result in disciplinary action, including the revocation of the license holder's own WCL and potential criminal charges. It directly contravenes the statutory requirements for a comprehensive and impartial review of all applicants. A third incorrect approach is to provide the friend with specific information about how to beat the system or exploit loopholes in the application process. This is ethically reprehensible and legally problematic. It not only demonstrates a lack of integrity, but also actively assists someone in potentially circumventing the law, which is contrary to the duty of upholding and administering the law fairly. This behavior erodes the credibility of the WCL system and could have serious consequences for both the individual providing the advice and the friend attempting to exploit it. Professional reasoning. Professionals in positions that involve the administration of licenses or permits must always prioritize adherence to the governing statutes and regulations. When faced with requests that could be influenced by personal relationships, a professional decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying the governing laws and regulations, in this case, Georgia's WCL statutes. 2. Assessing the request against these legal requirements, focusing on impartiality and due process. 3. Recognizing any potential for conflict of interest or appearance of impropriety. 4. Communicating clearly and professionally, explaining the legal and procedural constraints that prevent any special treatment. 5. Documenting the interaction and the decision made, especially if a refusal is necessary. The guiding principle is always to serve the public interest by ensuring fair and lawful application of the rules. Question 12. The control framework reveals that an applicant for a Georgia weapons carry license, WCL, has disclosed a prior arrest for simple battery that was subsequently dismissed without prejudice. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority to determine the applicant's eligibility? Option A. Deny the WCL application solely based on the disclosure of an arrest, regardless of its dismissal status, as arrests inherently indicate potential risk. Option B. Evaluate the applicant's eligibility by researching Georgia statutes and case law to understand the legal implications of a dismissal without prejudice on disqualifying offenses for a WCL, and assess whether the underlying conduct, despite dismissal, warrants disqualification under WCL. Section 16-11-129. Option C. Immediately approve the WCL application because the arrest was dismissed, signifying the matter is resolved and no longer a disqualifying offense. Option D. Advise the applicant to obtain a court order formally expunging the arrest record before proceeding with the WCL application, as any record of arrest is a disqualifier. The correct answer is B. Evaluate the applicant's eligibility by researching Georgia statutes and case law to understand the legal implications of a dismissal without prejudice on disqualifying offenses for a WCL, and assess whether the underlying conduct, despite dismissal, warrants disqualification under WCL. Section 16-11-129. Explanation. The control framework reveals a scenario where an applicant for a Georgia weapons carry license, WCL, has a prior arrest for simple battery that was dismissed without prejudice. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires careful interpretation of Georgia law regarding disqualifying offenses, specifically how a dismissal impacts eligibility. The applicant's honesty in disclosing the arrest is a positive factor, but the legal implications of the dismissal are paramount. The correct approach involves thoroughly researching the specific Georgia statutes and case law pertaining to disqualifying offenses for a WCL, particularly concerning arrests that were dismissed. This requires understanding that a dismissal without prejudice generally means the case can be refiled, and therefore, the underlying conduct may still be considered by the licensing authority. The Georgia Weapons Carry Act, OCG, Section 16-11-129, outlines disqualifying offenses. While a conviction is a clear disqualifier, the law also addresses arrests and indictments. A careful review of the Act and relevant interpretations would reveal that a dismissal without prejudice does not automatically erase the arrest from consideration for licensing purposes, and the licensing authority has discretion to evaluate the circumstances. Therefore, the applicant's eligibility hinges on whether the licensing authority, after reviewing the dismissed charge and any accompanying documentation, determines the underlying conduct disqualifies them under the Act. This approach prioritizes legal accuracy and adherence to the specific provisions of Georgia law. An incorrect approach would be to assume that any dismissal, regardless of prejudice, automatically clears an applicant. This fails to acknowledge that a dismissal without prejudice leaves the possibility of refiling, and thus the underlying conduct remains a potential concern for public safety, which is a core consideration for WCL issuance. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the applicant's assertion that the matter is resolved without independent legal verification of the dismissal's implications under Georgia law. This bypasses the due diligence required by the licensing authority. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on the absence of a conviction, without considering the nuances of dismissed charges as potentially disqualifying under Georgia's statutory framework, would be a significant ethical and legal failure. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a systematic process. First, identify the relevant jurisdiction's laws, Georgia Weapons Carry Act. Second, meticulously research the specific provisions related to arrests, indictments, and convictions, paying close attention to the legal effect of different types of dismissals. Third, consult legal counsel or authoritative legal resources if the interpretation of the law is unclear. Fourth, apply the law to the specific facts of the applicant's case, considering all disclosed information and any necessary background checks. Finally, make a determination based on a comprehensive understanding of the legal requirements and the licensing authority's discretion. Question 13. Strategic planning requires a Georgia weapons carry license holder to understand the nuances of where carrying a handgun is permissible. If a license holder is attending a public school board meeting held within a public school building in Georgia, what is the legally mandated approach regarding carrying a firearm? Option A. Carry the firearm, as a valid weapons carry license generally permits carrying in most public places, and a school board meeting is a public gathering. Option B. Carry the firearm, but only if the license holder believes their presence is necessary for personal safety during the meeting. Option C. Carry the firearm, as the meeting is not a formal educational activity and therefore not subject to the same restrictions as a classroom. Option D. Do not carry the firearm, as OCG. Section 16-11-127. 1 explicitly prohibits carrying firearms in public schools. The correct answer is A. Carry the firearm, as a valid weapons carry license generally permits carrying in most public places, and a school board meeting is a public gathering. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to navigate a situation where their personal beliefs might conflict with the legal requirements for carrying a weapon in Georgia. The core challenge lies in understanding the scope of the Georgia Weapons Carry License, WCL, and the specific prohibitions associated with it, even when an individual believes they are acting in a justifiable manner. Misinterpreting these laws can lead to serious legal consequences, including the revocation of a WCL and potential criminal charges. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with Georgia law, prioritizing public safety and legal obligations over personal interpretations of justification. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding and strict adherence to the Georgia Weapons Carry License statutes, specifically OCG. Section 16-11-127. 1. Which outlines prohibited places where carrying a firearm is illegal, regardless of a valid WCL. This approach prioritizes legal compliance by recognizing that a WCL grants the privilege to carry a handgun under specific conditions, not an unfettered right to carry in all locations. The law clearly enumerates places such as courthouses, polling places, correctional facilities, and places of worship during services. Therefore, an individual with a WCL must actively avoid carrying a firearm in these statutorily defined prohibited areas. This is correct because it directly aligns with the explicit legal framework established by the Georgia General Assembly for the regulation of weapons carry. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that a valid WCL overrides all location-specific prohibitions, believing that the license itself grants permission to carry in any location. This fails to acknowledge that the WCL is a permit to carry, subject to numerous statutory restrictions on where it can be exercised. Another incorrect approach is to rely on personal interpretations of whether a location is safe or appropriate for carrying a firearm, rather than consulting the definitive list of prohibited places outlined in Georgia law. This introduces subjective judgment where objective legal standards are required. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to carry a firearm in a prohibited location based on a belief that the specific circumstances of the day or the individual's perceived need for self-defense justify an exception to the law. This disregards the legislative intent behind these prohibitions, which are designed to enhance safety in sensitive environments. Professional reasoning. Professionals seeking or holding a Georgia weapons carry license should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive review of CCWExam, Section 16-11-127, 1 and other relevant sections of the Georgia firearms laws. This framework involves understanding that a WCL is a privilege, not an absolute right, and that specific locations are legally off-limits. When in doubt about the legality of carrying a firearm in a particular location, the professional should err on the side of caution and consult official legal resources or seek clarification from law enforcement or legal counsel. The decision-making process should always prioritize adherence to the letter of the law and the spirit of public safety regulations over personal assumptions or situational interpretations. Question 14. Strategic planning requires a Georgia weapons carry license holder to anticipate potential scenarios where carrying a firearm might be considered. Considering the specific legal framework of Georgia, which of the following represents the most responsible and legally compliant approach when encountering a situation where the legality of carrying a weapon is uncertain due to the location? Option A. Rely on the advice of friends or online forums to determine if carrying a weapon in the uncertain location is permissible. Option B. Assume that a valid weapons carry license permits carrying in most public places, unless explicitly and obviously prohibited by signage. Option C. Proactively consult the official Georgia code annotated to verify the specific legal status of the location for firearm carry before making any decision. Option D. Proceed with carrying the weapon if a perceived threat exists, and address any legal questions later if confronted. The correct answer is C. Proactively consult the official Georgia code annotated to verify the specific legal status of the location for firearm carry before making any decision. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to navigate the nuances of Georgia's weapons carry license, WCL laws, while balancing personal safety concerns with legal obligations. The core challenge lies in understanding the scope of permissible carry locations and the specific prohibitions outlined in Georgia law, particularly when encountering situations that might be perceived as ambiguous or potentially threatening. A WCL holder must exercise sound judgment and possess a thorough understanding of the law to avoid unintentional violations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a proactive and informed approach to understanding and adhering to Georgia's weapons carry license regulations. This means thoroughly familiarizing oneself with the specific statutes that define prohibited places and circumstances for carrying a weapon, even with a valid WCL. It requires consulting official Georgia code annotated CCWExam. Sections related to weapons and firearms such as CCWExam. Section 16-11-126 et seq., which detail lawful carry and prohibited locations. This approach ensures that the individual acts with full knowledge of the legal boundaries, prioritizing compliance and responsible firearm ownership. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that a valid WCL grants unrestricted carry rights in all public spaces, disregarding specific statutory prohibitions. This failure to consult and understand the detailed provisions of Georgia law, particularly those concerning places like schools, courthouses, or government buildings where firearms are explicitly prohibited regardless of a WCL, constitutes a direct violation of the regulatory framework. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence and an over-reliance on a general understanding of the license rather than specific legal requirements. Another incorrect approach is to rely on informal advice or personal interpretations of the law from non-official sources. Georgia law is precise, and misinterpretations can lead to serious legal consequences. Relying on hearsay or the opinions of others without verifying against the official Georgia Code annotated is a significant ethical and legal failure. It bypasses the established channels for legal information and can result in actions that are contrary to the law, even if done with good intentions. A third incorrect approach is to make a judgment call based solely on a perceived threat, without first confirming the legality of carrying a weapon in that specific location, according to Georgia law. While personal safety is a valid concern, the WCL is granted with the understanding that its use is governed by strict legal parameters. Acting on a subjective assessment of threat without considering the explicit legal restrictions on carry locations can lead to carrying a firearm in a prohibited area, thereby violating WCL Section 16-11-127, 1, which outlines specific prohibitions. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Georgia who hold a weapons carry license must adopt a decision-making framework rooted in a commitment to legal compliance and responsible conduct. This framework begins with a thorough and ongoing education of the relevant Georgia statutes governing firearms and concealed carry. When faced with a situation that might involve carrying a weapon, the professional must first consult the Georgia Code annotated to confirm the legality of carrying in that specific location and under those specific circumstances. If there is any doubt, the safest and most legally sound decision is to refrain from carrying the weapon in that location until absolute clarity is achieved. This approach prioritizes adherence to the law, protects the individual from legal repercussions, and upholds the integrity of the weapons carry license system. Question 15. Which approach would be most professionally sound for an applicant seeking a Georgia weapons carry license who had a prior arrest and conviction for simple battery that has since been expunged? Option A. Disclose only the arrest for simple battery but not the conviction as the conviction was expunged. Option B. Disclose the conviction for simple battery but not the arrest as the arrest is superseded by the conviction. Option C. Omit any mention of the arrest and conviction for simple battery, assuming the expungement makes it irrelevant. Option D. Disclose the arrest and conviction for simple battery and also state that the record has been expunged. The correct answer is D. Disclose the arrest and conviction for simple battery, and also state that the record has been expunged. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an applicant to navigate the nuances of Georgia's weapons carry license, WCL, application process when faced with a past legal issue that might be perceived as disqualifying. The applicant must accurately and truthfully represent their history while understanding which past events, if any, would automatically preclude them from obtaining a WCL under Georgia law. Careful judgment is required to avoid misrepresentation, which can have severe consequences. The best approach involves proactively and truthfully disclosing the past arrest and conviction for simple battery, along with the subsequent expungement. This demonstrates honesty and an understanding of the application requirements. Georgia law under WCL Section 16-11-129 outlines disqualifying offenses. While simple battery can be a disqualifying offense, the fact that it was expunged is a critical factor. An expunged record in many contexts means the offense is treated as if it never occurred for purposes of licensing and employment, provided the applicant meets all other criteria. By disclosing the arrest and conviction, and importantly, the expungement, the applicant allows the licensing authority to review the full record and make an informed decision based on the current legal status of the offense. This approach aligns with the ethical obligation of truthfulness in all applications and respects the legal process of expungement. An incorrect approach would be to omit the arrest and conviction entirely, hoping it goes unnoticed. This constitutes a material misrepresentation on the application, which is grounds for denial of the WCL and potential criminal charges. Even if the offense was expunged, the act of failing to disclose a prior arrest and conviction, regardless of its current legal standing, is a violation of the application's truthfulness requirements. Another incorrect approach would be to only disclose the arrest but not the conviction, or vice versa. Incomplete disclosure is still a form of misrepresentation. The application requires a full and accurate accounting of legal history, including both arrests and conviction, and their resolutions. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to assume that because the offense was expunged, it is irrelevant and therefore does not need to be mentioned. While expungement significantly alters the legal effect of a conviction, the application process often requires disclosure of the underlying events to ensure transparency and allow the issuing authority to verify the expungement and confirm eligibility. The applicant should not unilaterally decide what information is relevant to the licensing authority. Professionals facing similar situations should adopt a framework of complete transparency and thorough research. First, understand the specific disclosure requirements of the application. Second, research the relevant laws of the jurisdiction, in this case, Georgia's WCL statutes and expungement laws, to understand how past offenses are treated. Third, err on the side of disclosure when in doubt, providing all relevant information truthfully and accurately. If an offense has been expunged, it is often advisable to mention the expungement alongside the disclosure of the original incident. Question 16. Investigation of a WCL holder in Georgia who is observed carrying a handgun in a public park during a community event where alcohol is being served raises questions about the lawful purpose of the carry. Which investigative approach best ensures compliance with Georgia's weapons carry license regulations? Option A. Conduct a thorough investigation by interviewing the WCL holder, event organizers, and any witnesses, while also observing the overall environment and the licensee's behavior to determine if the weapon was being carried for a lawful purpose, such as self-defense, or if prohibited activities were occurring. Option B. Immediately issue a citation for unlawful weapons carry based on the presence of alcohol at the event, assuming the WCL holder's intent is compromised. Option C. Rely on the assumption that the presence of a handgun at a public event with alcohol automatically constitutes a violation of Georgia's weapons carry license laws, and confiscate the firearm pending further review. Option D. Focus solely on the fact that the WCL holder is carrying a handgun in a public place, regardless of the context, and detain them for questioning about their intentions. Correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough investigation by interviewing the WCL holder, event organizers, and any witnesses, while also observing the overall environment and the licensee's behavior to determine if the weapon was being carried for a lawful purpose, such as self-defense, or if prohibited activities were occurring. Explanation. Investigation of a potential violation of Georgia's weapons carry license, WCL, laws presents a professionally challenging scenario due to the nuanced interpretation of lawful purpose and the potential for misjudgment leading to serious legal consequences for both the licensee and the investigating officer. The core challenge lies in distinguishing between legitimate self-defense or recreational use and prohibited activity, especially when circumstances are ambiguous or rapidly evolving. Careful judgment is required to uphold the rights of licensed carriers while ensuring public safety. The correct approach involves a thorough, objective investigation that prioritizes gathering all relevant facts before making any determination. This means speaking with all involved parties, observing the environment, and reviewing any available evidence, such as witness statements or physical evidence, to establish the context of the weapon's presence and the licensee's actions. This approach is correct because it aligns with the principles of due process and the presumption of innocence, and it directly addresses the requirement under Georgia law to ascertain if the weapon was being carried for a lawful purpose. Specifically, Georgia Law O.C.G.A. Section 16-11-126 et sec. outlines the conditions under which a WCL holder may carry a weapon, and a determination of unlawful carrying requires evidence demonstrating a lack of lawful purpose or engagement in prohibited activities. This fact-based investigation ensures that any action taken is grounded in evidence and legal precedent, rather than assumption or immediate suspicion. An incorrect approach would be to immediately assume unlawful intent based solely on the presence of a firearm, without further investigation. This fails to acknowledge the lawful rights of a WCL holder and bypasses the crucial step of determining lawful purpose potentially leading to an unwarranted accusation or arrest. Another incorrect approach is to rely on hearsay or incomplete witness accounts without corroboration. This violates fundamental investigative principles and can lead to miscarriages of justice. Finally, an approach that focuses on the licensee's perceived demeanor rather than objective actions and circumstances is also flawed, as personal feelings or assumptions about a person's character are not legal justifications for restricting their rights. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a presumption of lawful conduct for a WCL holder. The investigation should then proceed with a neutral and objective gathering of facts, seeking to understand the totality of the circumstances. This involves active listening, careful observation, and a commitment to understanding the legal framework governing weapons carry in Georgia. If evidence emerges that contradicts the presumption of lawful purpose, then further investigative steps, consistent with legal standards, should be taken. Question 17. Assessment of a licensed weapons carry license holder's response in Georgia when observing an individual exhibiting furtive movements and repeatedly looking around in a dimly lit parking lot late at night. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action? Option A. Maintain situational awareness, increase distance if possible, and observe the individual from a safe vantage point without drawing or brandishing a weapon, only considering defensive action if an immediate threat of death or great bodily harm becomes apparent. Option B. Call 911 and report the suspicious individual, then draw your weapon and position yourself to defend against any perceived threat before law enforcement arrives. Option C. Immediately draw your concealed weapon and approach the individual to ascertain their intentions, believing it is better to be prepared for a confrontation. Option D. Confront the individual directly, asking them what they are doing in the parking lot to deter any potential criminal activity. The correct answer is A. Maintain situational awareness, increase distance if possible, and observe the individual from a safe vantage point without drawing or brandishing a weapon, only considering defensive action if an immediate threat of death or great bodily harm becomes apparent. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance their personal right to self-defense with the legal obligations and responsibilities associated with carrying a weapon in public. The core of the challenge lies in accurately assessing a situation for immediate threat versus potential future risk, and understanding the legal boundaries of using force, even when legally armed. Misjudgment can lead to severe legal consequences, including criminal charges and the loss of the weapons carry license. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves de-escalation and avoidance whenever possible, coupled with a clear understanding of imminent threat. This approach prioritizes personal safety through situational awareness and a commitment to only using force as a last resort, strictly within the bounds of Georgia law. Specifically, Georgia law permits the use of deadly force only when a person reasonably believes it is necessary to prevent death or great bodily harm to themselves or another, or to prevent the commission of a forcible felony. Therefore, observing a person acting suspiciously but without overt threatening behavior does not meet the threshold for drawing or using a weapon. The correct response is to disengage, increase distance, and observe from a safe vantage point while remaining aware of surroundings. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves drawing a weapon based on suspicion or a perceived future threat. This violates Georgia law, which requires an imminent threat of death or great bodily harm. Drawing a weapon without such a threat can be construed as brandishing or an unlawful display, leading to criminal charges and WCL revocation. Another incorrect approach is to confront the suspicious individual directly. Seemingly proactive, this escalates the situation and places the license holder in unnecessary danger. It bypasses the principle of avoidance and de-escalation, and could lead to a confrontation where the use of force, even if justified later, might have been preventable. A third incorrect approach is to immediately call law enforcement and report the individual without first assessing the immediate threat level to oneself or others. While reporting suspicious activity is often encouraged, the immediate action of drawing a weapon based solely on this report, without observing any direct threatening behavior, is premature and potentially unlawful. The focus should remain on personal safety and avoiding escalation until a clear and present danger is established. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes situational awareness, threat assessment, and adherence to legal statutes. This involves 1. Maintaining constant awareness of surroundings. 2. Evaluating observed behavior for overt signs of immediate threat. 3. Prioritizing avoidance and de-escalation. 4. Understanding the specific legal definitions of imminent threat and justifiable use of force under Georgia law. 5. Only resorting to drawing a weapon when there is a reasonable belief of imminent danger of death or great bodily harm. 6. If safe to do so, disengaging from the situation. 7. If necessary, contacting law enforcement to report suspicious activity without escalating the situation personally. Question 18. The monitoring system demonstrates that a Georgia resident, while experiencing a credible and immediate threat to their personal safety, has carried a handgun without a weapons carry license, WCL, for self-defense. Following the resolution of the immediate threat, the resident now seeks to understand the most appropriate course of action to ensure future legal compliance and responsible firearm ownership in Georgia. Option A. Immediately apply for Georgia Weapons Carry License, WCL, and continue to carry the handgun only after the license is issued, while understanding that the prior carry under immediate threat may be subject to legal review. Option B. Carry the handgun without a WCL until the resident feels the threat has completely subsided, and then apply for a WCL, believing this sequence of events is permissible under Georgia law. Option C. Assume that carrying a handgun for self-defense during an immediate threat negates the requirement for a WCL for all future carry, and continue to carry without obtaining a license. Option D. Cease carrying the handgun entirely and never attempt to obtain a WCL, as the prior unlicensed carry, even under threat, creates an insurmountable legal barrier. Correct answer is A. Immediately apply for Georgia Weapons Carry License, WCL, and continue to carry the handgun only after the license is issued, while understanding that the prior carry under immediate threat may be subject to legal review. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in balancing the need for immediate self-defense with the legal requirements and ethical considerations surrounding the carrying of a weapon in Georgia. The individual is in a situation where they perceive a threat, but their immediate reaction must be tempered by an understanding of their legal obligations and the potential consequences of their actions. The core challenge lies in discerning when the right to self-defense supersedes the need for strict adherence to licensing procedures, and how to navigate such a situation without violating Georgia law. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves prioritizing immediate safety while simultaneously initiating the process to comply with Georgia's weapons carry license, WCL, requirements as soon as practically possible. This means recognizing the immediate threat and taking necessary defensive actions if unavoidable, but then immediately seeking to obtain the WCL. This approach aligns with Georgia law, which allows for certain exceptions to carrying without a license in specific, immediate self-defense situations, but strongly encourages and mandates licensing for general carry. The ethical imperative is to act responsibly, minimizing risk to oneself and others, and to rectify any legal non-compliance promptly. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that the perceived threat automatically grants the right to carry a weapon without a license indefinitely, even after the immediate danger has passed. This fails to recognize that Georgia law requires a WCL for the general carrying of handguns, with limited exceptions. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the perceived threat entirely and refrain from any defensive action, even if legally permissible, due to a lack of a WCL. This could lead to personal harm and does not reflect the responsible exercise of the right to self-defense. Finally, attempting to obtain a WCL only after an incident has occurred, without addressing the immediate need for self-protection if genuinely threatened, is also an inadequate response. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Georgia should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes immediate safety in a genuine threat situation, followed by swift and diligent action to achieve legal compliance. This involves understanding the nuances of Georgia's self-defense laws and WCL requirements. When faced with a perceived threat, assess the imminence and severity. If immediate action is necessary for self-preservation, take it. However, immediately thereafter, the priority must shift to obtaining a WCL to ensure lawful carrying moving forward. This proactive and responsible approach minimizes legal risk and upholds ethical standards. Question 19. Strategic planning requires a Georgia weapons carry license (WCL) holder to consider their conduct in public spaces. If a WCL holder is attending a community event in a public park in Atlanta, Georgia, and wishes to carry their firearm, what is the most responsible and legally compliant approach to ensure they are exercising their rights without causing undue alarm or violating state statutes? Option A. Carry the firearm concealed but remain near the entrance of the park to be able to leave quickly if any issues arise. Option B. Carry the firearm concealed but engage in loud conversations to draw attention to their presence. Option C. Carry the firearm openly in a visible holster. Option D. Carry the firearm concealed in a manner that is not visible to others. The correct answer is D. Carry the firearm concealed in a manner that is not visible to others. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate the nuanced application of Georgia's weapons carry license (WCL) laws in a public, potentially volatile situation. The core difficulty lies in balancing the right to carry a firearm with the responsibility to avoid creating unnecessary alarm or violating specific prohibitions outlined in Georgia law. Misjudgment can lead to legal repercussions, public outcry, and a loss of trust in responsible firearm ownership. Careful judgment is required to ensure actions are both lawful and socially responsible. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves discreetly carrying the firearm in a manner that is not readily visible to the public, thereby avoiding any perception of threat or intimidation. This approach aligns with the spirit of Georgia law, which permits licensed individuals to carry firearms for lawful purposes, but also emphasizes avoiding actions that could be construed as brandishing or creating a public disturbance. By keeping the firearm concealed, the licensee respects the comfort and safety of others while exercising their legal right. This proactive measure prevents potential misunderstandings and avoids triggering unnecessary scrutiny or alarm. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves openly displaying the firearm, even if holstered, in a manner that is easily noticeable by others. This action directly contravenes the principle of responsible carry by potentially causing alarm and violating the spirit, if not the letter, of laws that prohibit the brandishing of weapons. While Georgia law permits carry, it does not endorse actions that create public fear or anxiety. Another incorrect approach is to carry the firearm in a location explicitly prohibited by Georgia law, such as inside a school building or a courthouse, regardless of whether it is concealed or openly displayed. This is a clear violation of statutory prohibitions and carries significant legal penalties, irrespective of the licensee's intent or the discretion with which the firearm is carried. A third incorrect approach is to carry the firearm while under the influence of alcohol or any drug that impairs judgment. Georgia law strictly prohibits carrying a weapon while intoxicated. This approach is fundamentally flawed as it compromises the licensee's ability to exercise sound judgment and control, posing a severe risk to themselves and others. Professional reasoning. Professionals faced with such situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to specific Georgia statutes governing weapons carry, alongside a strong ethical consideration for public safety and perception. This involves understanding not only what is legally permissible, but also what is professionally responsible. A key step is to be intimately familiar with all prohibited locations and circumstances for carrying a firearm as defined by Georgia law. Furthermore, professionals should consider the context of their carry. Is it discreet and unobtrusive, or is it likely to cause alarm? When in doubt, erring on the side of caution and discretion is the most prudent course of action to uphold both legal compliance and public trust. Question 20. Market research demonstrates that applicants for a Georgia weapons carry license, WCL, are often concerned about the accuracy of the fees charged. An active duty member of the United States Army who is a resident of Georgia presents their application and valid military identification. Based on Georgia law, what is the correct total fee this applicant should be charged for their weapons carry license? Option A, $80, 00. Option B, $60, 00. Option C, $50, 00. Option D, $70, 00. Correct answer is C, $50, 00. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge related to the accurate calculation of fees for Georgia Weapons Carry License (WCL) application. Miscalculating these fees can lead to either overcharging applicants, potentially violating consumer protection principles and Georgia law regarding fair fees, or undercharging, resulting in financial loss for the issuing authority and potentially violating internal financial policies. The challenge lies in ensuring precise adherence to the fee structure as defined by Georgia law, which can involve multiple components and potential exemptions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously reviewing the Georgia Code, specifically O.C.G. A. Section 16-11-129, which outlines the fees associated with a WCL. This approach requires understanding that the base application fee is $70.00 with an additional $10.00 for fingerprinting, totaling $80.00. It also necessitates recognizing that Georgia law provides for a reduced fee of $50.00 for individuals who are active duty military personnel or honorably discharged veterans, provided they present proper documentation. Therefore, the correct calculation for an active duty military applicant would be $50.00. This approach is correct because it directly applies the statutory provisions for WCL fees, ensuring compliance with Georgia law and fair treatment of applicants. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to apply the full $80.00 fee to all applicants, regardless of their military status. This fails to recognize and implement the statutory exemption for active duty military personnel and honorably discharged veterans, as stipulated in O.C.G. A. Section 16-11-129 F.1. This is an ethical and regulatory failure because it results in overcharging a protected group. Another incorrect approach is to only charge the base application fee of $70.00, omitting the $10.00 fingerprinting fee. This is a regulatory failure, as it does not comply with the full fee structure mandated by Georgia law for processing WCL applications, potentially leading to a deficit in the funds allocated for the licensing process. A further incorrect approach is to arbitrarily reduce the fee for an applicant without a clear statutory basis or proper documentation. For instance, offering a discount simply because an applicant claims to be a veteran without requiring proof would be a violation of the specific requirements outlined in O.C.G. A. Section 16-11-129 F.1, which mandates documentation for the reduced fee. This is both an ethical and regulatory failure, as it undermines the integrity of the fee structure and could lead to inconsistent application of the law. Professional reasoning. Professionals processing WCL applications in Georgia should adopt a systematic approach. First, they must be thoroughly familiar with O.C.G. A. Section 16-11-129, particularly the fee schedule and any applicable exemptions. Second, when an applicant claims eligibility for a reduced fee e.g. military status, they must verify the eligibility criteria and request the necessary supporting documentation as specified by law. Third, all calculations should be double-checked to ensure accuracy before presenting the final fee to the applicant. This methodical process, grounded in a deep understanding of the relevant statutes, ensures both legal compliance and ethical conduct.